Hello, everyone. I have with me today a guest I've had on before, Dr. Marian Tupy, and a new guest, his co-author at the moment of a new book called Superabundance, the story of population growth, innovation, and human flourishing on an infinitely bountiful planet, 2022. It's the most complete opposite of any apocalyptic title you might ever envision. Marian has talked to me before, particularly about his book, 10 Global Trends Every Smart Person Should Know, and many others you will find interesting. That was published in 2020. Marian is the editor of humanprogress.org, which is a very good site, and I retweet them quite consistently. He's a senior fellow at the Center for Global Liberty and Prosperity and the co-author of the Simon Abundance Index, which we will talk about to some degree today. He specializes in globalization, study of globalization, and global well-being and politics and the economics of Europe and Southern Africa. Dr. Gail Pooley is Associate Professor of Business Management at Brigham Young University at Hawaii. He's taught economics and statistics at Al Faisal University in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, Brigham Young in Idaho, Boise State University, and the College of Idaho. He earned his BBA in economics at Boise State, did graduate work at Montana State, completed his PhD at the University of Idaho. He's been part of the development of the Simon Abundance Index as well. And as I said, is the co-author of this new book, Superabundance, which is a lot different than apocalyptic doom, as I pointed out. Both of Doctors Tupy and Gale have published widely in the public domain, as well as professionally in outlets like the Financial Times, the National Review, the particularly evil journal Quillette, Forbes, the American Spectator, the Washington Post, etc. Many of your, what would you call them, traditional suspects or usual suspects. So anyways, we're going to talk about this new book today, Superabundance, a 3-part, 10-chapter analysis of why, strangely enough, things seem to be a lot better than we think and perhaps better than they ever were. And although we're more concerned about it than we ever seem to have been before. So welcome, gentlemen. Thank you very much for agreeing to talk to me, and congratulations on your new book.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be with you.
Yeah, so let's start with superabundance. I don't know whether to start with Julian Simon's famous bet. That's not it's kind of a nice narrative entry point, eh?
I think that's right. Yeah.
All right. Well, so why don't you outline for our listeners and viewers the nature of this famous bet, why it was made, and what its broader cultural significance was, because it was really a watershed bet, I think, in many ways.
Well, so in the post-Second World War era, global population started to grow at a much faster rate than before, partly because of a tremendous amount of medical and scientific knowledge that started to spread around the world. Babies started to, fewer babies started to die. Young people started to grow grow older, and so forth. And some people started to freak out about it. They thought that there was going to be too many people in the world, and consequently, we were going to run out of resources. Prices of resources were going to go sky high, and there would be mass starvation. Now, the man who brought this particular obsession or potential problem into the public sphere was Paul Ehrlich, who still is alive. He's a biologist at Stanford University. And in 1968...
Still causing trouble.
Still causing trouble, still to, yeah. And in 1968, he wrote an extremely popular book which sold millions of copies called The Population Bomb. And the population bomb started in a sort of very terrifying language that we have become accustomed to from extreme environmentalists over the decades. And it basically said, no matter what policy changes we are going to make now, in the 1970s, hundreds of millions of people are going to die due to starvation. In fact, none of that happened. Nonetheless, Paul Ehrlich's book, The Population Bomb, scared and scarred psychologically generations of people. Movies had been made about how the world was going to run out of resources and end in a catastrophe. One of the more famous ones was with Charlton Heston. It was called Soylent Green. And the reason why it's important is because Soylent Green, whilst it was filmed in 1974, was supposed to come to fruition in 2022, which is this year. And the basic premise of the book was that the world was completely empty of food. And so every time a person died, that person would be converted into biscuits called Soylent Green, which would be then fed to the people who stayed behind. So on the other side of the country...
Right, and so a lot of this, just to give some background to that too, a lot of this was based on hypothetical biological thinking, predicated on the work of Malthus, and it's sort of a yeast or rat model of human existence. So if you have a colony of yeast and they have a finite medium that they're growing in, so a finite source of food, and you let the yeast multiply, or they provide them with the preconditions for their multiplication, their population will expand until they consume all the available resources, and then it will precipitously collapse in starvation. And people tried similar, although less simple, experiments with rats showing similar behavior, and then I would say documented similar phenomena in the field. I mean, animals will overgraze, for example, if they're herbivores, will overgraze available cropland if they're not kept in check, so to speak, by predators. And biologists extrapolated from this and said that under all other things being equal, populations will expand until they consume more available resources than will sustain them, and then they will tend to precipitously collapse. And then that was applied to the human condition. But as we see from the rest of your story, the economists objected to this.
Yes, so the view that you just described is particularly popular amongst biologists. Economists don't think like that because they recognize that human beings are fundamentally different from rats or deer or rabbits or whatever else. Or yeast. We have this thing called intelligence and the ability to apply these little gray cells in order to come up with innovations which can get around the problem of scarcity. So on the other side of the country, early, as I said, it was in Stanford in California. On the other side of the country at the University of Maryland, there was an economist called Julian Simon, a very intelligent and very interesting man who looked at the data actually and started noticing that things were becoming cheaper, which means that they were becoming